Let's get started. Okay. Now, okay, so we watch our participant numbers from Tim. So screen. So, hi Katya.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Jeff.
Hi,
Hi
Kat.
Chrissy. And
Hi,
Claudia.
Chrissy. Hi, Claudia.
How's everyone doing?
Yeah.
Karen, you need a cup of coffee.
No, I'm sick. I have COVID, so.
Oh, God.
But I'm
Yeah.
Sorry.
super vaxxed. I'm super vaxxed, so it's not that bad, but
We got our booster right before we left for Cyprus.
yeah,
We're
Okay.
better, but
we're better. I could be so much, it could be so much worse, but I'm not perky.
Sorry.
so there was like over 100 people who registered.
You kidding me?
No.
Oh my God. I need to change my slides right now. I'm kidding.
Unfortunately, sometimes people are late.
Right.
We can wait just a couple of minutes.
So there's 20 people right now, 21. So we give a few more minutes. So I'll just give a kind of a brief what's my word? A brief spiel about the project, introduce you, and then I'll just turn it over. And Olga, how should I'm having some little difficulties talking, but so I'll need you to kind of override me, whatever. Anyway, Natalia, have you heard from Natalia, Olga? Because I didn't see her register. Olga, are you there?
I'm just trying to help.
Okay. So we'll see. Okay, so maybe we get started when we hit 30. Or maybe we just get started now.
Okay, I'm gonna get off instead of looking tired.
Instead of looking tired.
Jeff, how many speakers do we have? 3 or 4?
Theoretically,
We
we
have
have
4.
4?
Информация для русскоязычных участников. Вы можете переключить каналы. Вот видите, тут такой кружочек написано русский. Если вы нажмете, то будет русский перевод.
Okay. I'm looking, this is different from the meeting ones. I'm looking for the share screen for doing the PowerPoints, and I am not seeing it up here. That's strange. I'm trying to figure out how to put in the, maybe it's under more. No, there's not usually it's up on top for share screen, but I don't see it.
It's at the bottom, Jeff.
Oh, it's here. I got it now. Okay.
Jeffrey, have you added Natalia as a speaker?
I haven't received your email address.
Sorry about this. There's already Q&As. Okay. You start. Okay, I'm Jeffrey Barber, and my colleague Olga Panasova. We're going to be facilitating this meeting. We're both part of this project, Don't Waste Our Earth. And this webinar is called Plastics in Fashion, Exploring the Impacts of Synthetic Materials in Fashion. And as I was saying, this is part of a project called Don't Waste Our Earth. And this Pathways Through the Plastic Crisis is a series of webinars looking at some of the different kinds of strategies and approaches that different people and groups are taking to deal with this plastic pollution problem. And for this webinar, we have, we're thankful to have participants in the founder of Sustainable Fashion Consumption Network. I'm from Integrated Strategies Forum, Olga's from Eco Accord, and we're all part of the European Eco Forum. So this is our website, and here's the complicated link to that, which we'll send around so it's easier. And basically, we got started in this because of this plastic crisis, which has all kinds of different dimensions, the impacts on health, on ecosystems, on climate change. There's this whole problem with recycling and the dependency that we have as individuals and as institutions on plastics. The issue about our needs and habits and the biases and our identity that's connected with this. Problems dealing with the petrochemical industry, their resistance to change, and the disinformation that is circling around. Our basic aims are to examine different actions and strategies to end plastic pollution, to identify intervention points in the cycles of plastic production, consumption, and disposal, to explore lifestyle and institutional pathways through the crisis, and to help ultimately change the systems and ways plastic is produced, consumed, and disposed. So in our Pathways for the Plastic Crisis, the webinar series, we've already done one on the Global Treaty on Plastics. We're getting ready for one on youth leadership, on sustainable living, plastics, toxics, and health, plastics in the circular economy, information and disinformation, and business and the local economy, and plastics on sustainable tourism, and today, plastics and sustainable fashion consumption. And I want to thank Katja for this wonderful poster that you sent around for us. That was so fast. I was very impressed. So we're going to get started. Our speakers are Katja Dayan, Research Associate from the University of Geneva, founder of the Sustainable Fashion Consumption Network, who's going to give an overview of how plastics is part of fashion. Then followed by Kirsi Latala, Senior Researcher at the Consumption Research Norway at the Oslo Metropolitan University, talking about microfiber pollution from laundering. And then Claudia Henninger, Reader in Fashion Marketing Management, University of Manchester, talking about the life cycle analysis of fashion materials and disposal. And finally, Natalia Kasenchak, fashion journalist and historian, and host of Fashion Stories with Natalia Kasenchak. So now I turn it over to Katja.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jeff and Karen and Olga, for this invitation. Let me just share my screen with you. Let me know. Here we go. Can you guys see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. So I am Katja Dayan Vladimirova. I am a senior researcher at the University of Geneva. And as Jeff has mentioned, I have I created a network that has grown, and I am part of it, but it's living a life of its own, the Sustainable Fashion Consumption Network. And when initially I received an invitation from Jeffrey and Karen to take part in this, discussion of plastics in fashion, I thought it would be a really great opportunity to bring in researchers and academics working on the plastics elements in our consumption agenda in the fashion consumption field. And myself, however, I really wanted to share some insights with you. However, plastics is not my primary area of interest. So my job today would be to introduce, to give you a context, a background of why are we even speaking about plastics in relation to fashion. You may be thinking about, plastic sunglasses, or maybe some plastic bags, or more, stylish items that are kind of rigid. However, plastics are now really entrenched in fiber production, and we see plastics in almost every, in majority of fashion items that are produced today. So let me start with a very brief, short history of the man-made synthetic fibers. On October 27th, DuPont has proudly announced the creation of the first fully man-made synthetic fiber. And this was one of the first initial fibers that would then later branch out into different types. I will speak about those in just a second. However, the first biggest market for synthetic fibers was the substitution of silk stockings, though stockings for women. And this was a huge revolution in the 1940s, 1949, after the war, and the markets and societies, economies were recovering. Nylon stockings became a huge hit because they wouldn't tear as much. They were much less fragile. They were easy to wash, and women absolutely loved them. Meanwhile, other types of synthetic fibers started evolving, and now, everything from stockings and undergarments to outwear started to include elements of synthetic fibers. And it brought with it, surprisingly, the democratizing of fashion to some extent, because it liberated housewives from unwanted household chores, such as ironing, because synthetic fibers were either wrinkle-free or really improved the performance, the looks of fabrics, because they had less wrinkles. So this liberation from ironing, and also easy to wash in a washing machine. It's unsurprising that in the 50s, I think between 1950 and 1956, there was the statistics that the sales of washing machines in the US have tripled. And that has to do also with the fact that synthetic fibers have found their way to people's wardrobes, to people's clothes. And it's been growing and growing since the 1950s, the use of synthetic fibers. And in the early 2000s, another very visible trend started to emerge. They were always, synthetic fibers were always mixed with natural fibers or cellulose-based fibers. However, in the 2000s, with the rise of fast fashion, we see a very, very clear trend of trying to cut down costs by shifting to synthetic fiber production and mixing fabrics. So it is cheaper to mix in for better performance, but also for cost efficiency, to mix in polyester with cotton, for example, and that would produce a cheaper fabric, especially now that the price of polyester has been dropping quite drastically. In terms of types of synthetic fibers, the most sort of well-known and up in the air in terms of discussion are polyester, acrylic, nylon, and spandex. Spandex is also known as elastane. Today, it's estimated that polyester fabrics represents about over a half of the global global fiber market. So there is more than half of the fibers that are produced are polyester fibers. And you can see polyester everywhere. I will walk through the different categories of goods that are made out of these different types. Acrylic, your sweaters, nylon, anything from sportswear, anything that needs to be tight, stay tight, or also be waterproof and water resistant. Spandex is something that adds elasticity, and very often we see spandex mixed in with other fibers to add more flexibility, elasticity to the garment. This is one of my favorite graphs recently. My source of kind of that grounds me, source of grounding me. This graph shows us the demand for different types of fabrics over the past, since 1940, so over the past century, basically 80 years. We can see how there is pretty much a steady growth and then a stagnation in demand for cotton. Some increase in demand for cellulosic fibers like the viscose or more recent generations of viscose. Demand for wool remains pretty much steady. However, what we see in blue is the line for synthetic fibers. And if you notice, there is this point in time when synthetics and cotton were used half-half at the same amount globally. And then after 1995, we see this skyrocketing demand for synthetics. This increase coincides with two other trends. The first other trend is the growth in fast fashion. So fast fashion model, this is when it picked up, early 2000s, this is when clothes started to be produced. There's more and more clothes being produced, and fast fashion thrives on synthetic fabrics. Fast fashion is, within fast fashion, it is possible to have low prices to a big extent, thanks to synthetic fibers that are cheap, that are inexpensive. And the second trend that this increase coincides with is, of course, the increased demand for fossil fuels, because synthetic fibers are essentially petroleum-based. The original synthetic fiber was made, I really love this description, it's made out of coal, water, and air. So it's a dream come true now. Now it is more, synthetic fibers are made out of petroleum. And we see that today they are dominating, they're really dominating the market of fibers, and we can find them pretty much everywhere. And I wanted to talk to you about the different kinds of use of synthetic fibers. Of course, we have certain areas where the use of synthetics is very much welcome. I've recently been reading a book about the golden thread, about different types of fabric and how they changed history. And there was a really interesting chapter about the Everest, conquering Everest, and how for many decades the daredevils were trying to conquer Everest wearing woolen undergarments, which got all soaking wet from sweat, and then the sweat actually froze off on people's bodies, preventing them from performing their best. And for the first time, people were able to reach Everest. That happened when synthetic fabrics were introduced to use as inner layers. So there are definitely some types of some activities that humans perform where fabrics really matter, and we are really better off, and we really need, for example, we need rain protection when we hike, we need water protection when we snowboard, do some sports like this poor guy who ran a marathon apparently. We need lighter fabrics, we need fabrics that dry quicker, cycling, running, you name it. I also added here, of course, the famous Patagonia advertisement, "Don't buy this jacket," which is an acknowledgement of the fact that indeed in sportswear, in outwear, athleisure products, we sometimes we cannot avoid buying new, but if we can, we really need to think twice about it. And Patagonia is well known for using synthetic fibers for their outwear products, but they're very much aware of this, and they are aware that there is a need to maintain these garments in use as long as possible through repair, resale, etc., etc. And of course, I just thought it would be appropriate to mention it here as one of the better examples of how the brands can accept and work on improving the use of synthetic fibers that they work with. However, there are other types and much more plentiful, categories of fashion products that include synthetics. Latest updates, so hurry if you can. Boohoo, today there is a sale on this particular top, 75% off for £3.30. You can buy this. It's part of the basics collection. And you can see here, it's made this top that feels it looks like cotton, feels like cotton. Many, of the garments that we use closer to bodies, most people report that they prefer to have something made out of cotton, of soft fabrics. So these fabrics that feel soft, that feel good close to the body, right now, many of them are being substituted by polyester, elastane, 100% polyester, or polycotton mixes. So in product categories where this is absolutely not necessary, and there are other materials that are available for the purpose of reducing costs. Another example is this sweater. Many people are used to having sweaters made out of wool. Historically, sweaters were made out of wool or cotton yarn. Today, if we look at the majority of sweaters that are jumpers, cardigans, any sort of knitwear that are sold by fast fashion brands, those would be a mix of acrylic polyester and cotton, or acrylic polyester, different melange, different mixes of fabrics. And you can see this here in the product details, the very bottom line. Again, looks like wool from the distance, like on the picture, but if you actually look at the composition, it's a recycling and waste nightmare, because this kind of fabrics, I will get to it, the mixed fabrics are really difficult at the downstream part of the process. Another, of course, element, another type of categories where we meet plastic is shoes, footwear. Not just your beautiful neon heels. Many shoes, boots today are made out of plastic, essentially, so not leather, but some sort of mixed synthetic mix that is aimed to look like leather and feel like leather, but it is not. On the right, of course, another popular trend of the past 10 years, the sneakers, very high contents of plastics and sneakers for soles, but also for the main body of the shoe. And I wanted to add here also the point that in the middle, by adding the Louis Vuitton canvas bag, these bags are also made of not of leather. These are synthetic bags. And the fast luxury, as some people call it, fast luxury is increasingly also substituting what used to be high-end materials and craftsmanship with essentially plastic, just capitalizing on the logo. So shoes, bags, and accessories are also full of plastic. There are different kinds of plastic. They may be more related to substituting leather, for example, than fibers, but this is also something to keep in mind. And regarding shoes, there is no way, for many shoes, there is no way to recycle them. There are no recycling facilities in grand scale, because mostly because they're really difficult to disassemble. Most shoes have been designed to be worn and then thrown away, rather than be worn and then disassembled and then recycled. So for most of the shoes that exist in the world today, their end of life is going to be either in an open landfill or incinerated, but there is nothing that we can really do to recycle them at this point. I want to mention very briefly, there are also some health impacts of synthetic fibers, while pure PET, so yeah, the synthetic fibers essentially have the same chemical composition as PET bottles. While essentially pure PET is not toxic to human body, what really is a problem are different sorts of dyes and chemical treatments that are used on these fabrics. And one of the more famous one recently came to the spotlight, antimony, is a type of chemical that is used as a flame retardant. And most of the time, this is a kind of treatment that polyester garments get, garments made out of polyester. And antimony is a known carcinogen, which is toxic to heart, lungs, liver, and skin. And only recently this issue has been raised to the attention of the global media and sustainable fashion community. People start to talk more about this. It's just one of many. And antimony it became known because it activates with higher temperatures. And when the person wearing, for example, sportswear, when this person sweats, the temperature of the body elevates, and it actually encourages the activates the antimony. So that's one of the more recent conversations that has been resurfacing about fashion, about synthetics in fashion and harmful effects for the health of people who wear these clothes. And finally, I just wanted to mention towards the end the challenges of mixed fabrics. I'm sure that Kirsi and Claudia are going to give a much better overview and detailed overview of these challenges. But here are the two examples, very typical. What if you look at your clothes, most people, if they look at their clothes, they will find a garment or multiple garments with this kind of compositions. To the left, we have the typical mix of cotton elastan. As I mentioned, elastan is added to cotton to increase elasticity. And it's impossible to separate at the end of life. So if we want to recycle cotton into cotton, we cannot really use a 95% cotton, 5% elastan mix to be recycled, because currently there's no technology to separate the two types of fibers. Another example, which is very, very common, is a polycotton mix, 50% cotton, 50% polyester. Same problem. When we mix, let's say, natural origin fabrics, cellulosic fabrics, with synthetic fabrics, currently at the recycling stage, at the end of life stage, we cannot separate the fibers, which means that in practice, if we could have 100% polyester garment, technically we could melt it down and make another polyester garment. Cotton or viscose, there's also innovative, projects like the New Cotton Project that are exploring and actually piloting the ways of also chemically recycling cellulosic fabrics and fibers into similar kind of fiber. However, if we mix the two, synthetic and natural origin fabrics, they become unrecyclable at this point of life, at this point of time, which means that they need to be thrown out. They need to be, at the end of life, when they're no longer usable, they either get burnt or get thrown out in open landfills, or else. There are not so many, unfortunately, choices here. I will finish here because I know that Kirsi and Claudia have some fantastic graphs and data for you to share. Thank you very much for your attention, and I remain open for any comments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katja. I assume the questions will be at the end of the session, so I think I'll just continue with my presentation. I'm sharing the screen. Let me see. Which screen are you seeing now?
What's your microfiber pollution? So I think it shows the your PowerPoint.
Okay, good. So it's without the notes on the side.
There's no notes, no.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Then it's correct. So yes, today I'm going to talk about the microfiber pollution from laundering. My name is Kirsi Laitala, and I am a senior researcher at the Consumption Research Norway, which is part of the Oslo Metropolitan University. And my background is in textile engineering, and I have a PhD in product design, and I work with consumer research. So I'm going to talk a lot from the consumer and textile perspective here. So I'm going to first introduce the topic. What are these microplastics and fibers? How do they spread? What are the problems? What can we do to reduce them? How do the EU policies tackle this problem, and what could be a way forward? So microplastics are basically the small plastics that are below the size of 5 millimeters. They can be either primary microplastics that are in this small size when they release into the nature, or they can be secondary microplastics that result from degradation and fragmentation processes in the nature. Synthetic textile fibers from laundering are considered as primary microplastics. And microfibers are one form of microplastics because they are shaped as as a fiber, while there are other examples like different flakes and micropads that have been used, for example, in a cosmetic products. And microfibers, they can be either synthetic plastics, as Katja already presented, or they can be natural materials like cotton that are biodegradable in nature. And here I'm only basically talking about the synthetic microfibers and microplastics. And nanoplastics are even smaller than the microplastics. You basically need a microscope to be able to see them, so they behave a little bit differently when they are in contact with ecological systems than the microplastics. So here is a flow chart that shows the various ways that microfibers can enter different ecosystems, either in a marine, freshwater, or terrestrial environments. And the spread starts already at the textile production, where the fibers can end up in the air or in the waterways, as well as in the textile workers that are working in the production sites. And then when we have the garments or other textiles at home, they can release these primary microfibers while we wear them to the air, and can be seen, for example, as dust in the households, but they also are released when we launder or tumble dry our garments. And the textiles may be reused and sometimes even recycled, but they will eventually be thrown out. And unless they are burnt, they will end up either at the landfills or in nature, where they after some time will start to degrade into smaller particles and then become secondary microplastics, which are a problem in, for example, when we export a lot of our clothes in Africa or other countries where they do not have the proper handling facilities for this kind of waste. And then go back to the laundering. The washing discharge water from laundering in most cases go through the wastewater treatment plants that capture somewhere between 60 and 99% of the microfibers, depending on which kind of technologies they are using and the local infrastructure. But they still will end up in nature depending on what is done on the sludge that is collected, because it's often used as a fertilizer in agriculture and then it ends up in soil. And there are very few countries that burn the sludge residual. I think Netherlands in Europe is one of the exemptions that actually do this. So the remaining part of microplastics that are not captured by these treatment plants will end up in different water systems and cause these problems in the ecosystem health and toxicity. And Katja already mentioned some of these problems. In addition to the issues with antimony and other chemicals, the use of non-renewable and non-biodegradable materials is a problem. To say something about the magnitude, the washing of synthetic clothing, it generates up to 46,000 tons of microfibers in laundering, which equals to about 600 quadrillion individual fibers yearly in Europe, and these are really big numbers. And these microplastics have been found everywhere, in blood of people and in breast milk, everywhere in nature, on top of Mount Everest and in the deeps of the Mariana Trench, as well as in the air we breathe. So some of the risks for impacts on ecological systems, there are three main mechanisms that can contribute the way that the microplastics impact the ecological systems. They're either physical, chemical, or biological mechanisms that can act individually, but also have combined effects. And currently we don't know so much about all these aspects yet. I think most research so far is found on the physical mechanisms and especially in aquatic environments. And the main problem is the main physical problem is microplastics that the small organisms eat instead of food and get the false satiation and blockages, which can have negative effects on the growth and reproduction, even survival. And these effects are stronger for smaller organisms than that are low in the food chains, and they therefore will impact higher up in the food chain in different ways. And microfibers are especially problematic because of their shape. They are easy to be eaten, but they are also more prone to get entangled in the gut because of their shape. Because irregular shaped microplastics are easier to get out of the body and these fibers. And the smaller size nanoparticles, they appear to be even more readily absorbed in the tissue and retain and accumulate in vital organs. And when it comes to plastics in soil, not so much is known, but they may alter the microbial activity, bulk density and carbon content, and potentially the plant growth. And when it comes to these chemical mechanisms, microfibers have a very high surface to volume ratio that increases the capacity to absorb different range of chemicals, such as pollutants. Because then when the microplastics are absorbed in the bodies, it raises the risk to having more toxic compounds in different organisms. And these potential mechanisms include leaching of plastic additives, such as the antioxidants, dyes, or fire retardants, as Katja already mentioned, and other pollutants that are in the aquatic environments. And the effect depends on the amount and nature of these pollutants and the extent of how much is bioaccumulated, how much of these chemicals are released, and what kind of health effects the specific type of species are likely to suffer. Then we also have the biological mechanisms, which are related to transfer of pathogens. For example, that the surface of microplastics provide a habitat for different organisms and microbial colonization. And one example of problems it can cause that microfibers that are passing through wastewater treatment plants may become enriched with these pathogens and then disperse these microbes further in the freshwater systems and in soils. We do not know so much about the impact on human health yet, but there are similar to ecological impacts. There's evidence for the physical, chemical, and biological mechanisms as well, acting either individually or in combination. And we basically eat, drink, and breathe microplastics, and they are found in our lungs and bloodstreams and tissues. Microfibers have chemical additives from the production, but they also serve from the environment, including toxic, but also carcinogenic and mutagenic chemicals. And there is this risk of transfer of pathogens through biological mechanisms, as I just mentioned, that can increase the risk of infection. And the smallest particles, like the nanoplastics, are the ones that can pass the gut barrier and reach the bloodstream. But so far as we know, the most microfibers that we ingest are most likely to pass harmlessly out of the body. But most of the research still concludes that there are too many knowledge gaps to securely assess the health risk of microplastics in detail. And of course, it's really difficult to research this because there are ethical concerns. You can't force people to eat a lot of microplastics to find out or how dangerous they are. And it's also difficult to have a control group that has not been exposed to microfibers because basically we all have been that. So most research is based on impacts on animals, and it's assumed that human exposure to microplastics could lead to oxidative stress, DNA damage, and inflammation, among other health problems. It seems that these low levels of exposure are not likely to cause serious toxicity, but the chronic exposure is anticipated to be greater concern because these effects accumulate. And one example where we can see it is, of course, the textile workers, where the occupational health problems include symptoms like coughing, being breathlessness, reduced lung capacity, and increased mucus production, and even potential to develop occupational asthma and lung inflammation. So what can we do to reduce the spread of microplastics in laundering? There's basically three different things. We can select different textiles, we can use our washing machines differently, and we can change our washing practices. And when it comes to the textile, the fiber type is very important. Firstly, if it's synthetic, and then how strong and how long the fibers are, because the shorter the fibers are, the more likely shedding is to occur. But even filament, yarn and fabric shed when they are abraded, for example, when they are worn, and fabrics rub against each other when they are washed. And some studies even indicate that recycled polyester fabric sheds more fibers than virgin polyester. Then the tightness of the yarns and fabrics is important, as the looser materials are able to lose more fibers. And the finishing of textiles impact, if there's, for example, a coated fabric, then it's the fibers are more glued in place and do not shred as much. And then the general quality of the product, as well as the age and condition. Some studies indicate that new materials lose more in the first wash, and then reduce the shredding until the material becomes more worn and fibers start to break again, and the shedding increases as the material is aging older. And then we have these different types of washing machines and programs. What is known is that especially the top loading machines with Accudator are a bit rougher on textiles, so they're more likely to increase the shedding of microfibers. And the textiles lose more fibers in laundering if they have space to move. So the machine capacity and load ratio and how much water we have are going to impact this. And the water discharge filtering system is of course important. So it's something that can be added to the machine in addition to the existing filters. And our own practices are of course important. How often we choose to wash our things instead of, for example, only cleaning stains would be a better alternative in many cases. Then we can select different type of washing cycles, temperature, and detergents. And in general, the aspects that improve the cleaning efficiency are also more likely to increase the shedding of fibers, which is a bit of problem, because we of course want our clothes to get clean to be able to use them for a longer time. Fabric softeners are known to reduce a little bit of the shedding, but it's not a good solution as they have environmental impacts of their own, and they can even increase the need for laundering. And in addition to laundering, also the tumble drying is important aspect, because a lot of fibers are lost in tumbling, and many of them are collected in a loft filter, while some of them are flying around in the air and end up in the dust in the bathroom. And the fibers from filters should be disposed in a way that they do not end up in nature. And it's possible to use additional filtering systems. So I will show some alternatives that are available today in the market. And basically 3 different types. You can use filtering laundry bags that are so tight that the microfibers do not pass through them. There's various types of laundry balls that catch a small part of the fibers that are floating in the water. And then there is many different versions of machine filters for the discharge water. And all of these are prone to have at least some effect, but it's really important to use them correctly, because otherwise the fibers will end up in different wrong places anyway. And as we can see, all of these are made of plastics, which is not really a optimal solution for reducing plastic pollution. So shortly about the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. It has a section about how to tackle the microplastic pollution. Currently, there is no single European law that covers microplastics in a comprehensive manner. And we don't even have a method for it yet in place. The standardization work is going on to how to measure these, but it is not. They have not finished their work yet. The EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. It's going to includes the plans for prevention and reduction, and plan to use the eco-design requirements within the sustainable product regulation, as well as the forthcoming Commission microplastic initiative for this. And so far it states that the planned measures will target the product design, manufacturing processes, pre-washing at industrial manufacturing plants, labeling, and the promotion of innovative materials. But it doesn't really directly say that they will aim to reduce the use of these synthetic materials, which is really a pity. And they also mention options like increasing the use of these washing machine filters, development of milder detergents, caretaking and washing guidelines, end-of-life textile waste treatment, and the regulations for improved wastewater and sewage sludge treatment. So to conclude, there is potentially a large and a growing risk of ecological and human health problems associated with microplastics. And as far as you can see, the most important measure to reduce the microplastic pollution is to reduce the use of synthetic materials. Mitigation strategies should focus on the sources, because removing fibers after the handed age is difficult or even impossible, for example, when they're in the soil. And the potential impact of other measures, it's too small compared to the continually increasing use of synthetic fibers, as Katja already showed us. The washing machine filters can reduce some of the fiber stress during laundering, but have their own additional impacts and will not affect the setting during the use that end up in the house dust and in the air. And it's also going to take a long time before these solutions are going to be in widespread use. And in addition to the fibers that are lost during use, the remainder of synthetic textile will also degrade into microplastic in the end, even after recycling, unless it's incinerated. So we have this problem anyway at the end. So that was my presentation. Thank you, everybody. I think the questions will be at the end.
Thank you, Kirsi. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about plastics. I have a confession to make. I'm very much into sustainable fashion. I'm interested in plastics, but I'm not a specialist whatsoever on life cycle assessment, but I'm going to try to talk a little bit about different things why I feel it's quite important to actually look at these different aspects. So first of all, I think Katja already set it up quite nicely in terms of what the problem is. We are very much accustomed to having garments that are easy care. So whether or not this is something to do with we don't have to laundry, we don't have to iron them anymore, they're super easy to wash, they're drying super quick, and most of the time the reason why this is the fact is because they're made from materials that we classify as plastics. Within the UK, we also do have a lot of throwaway fashion. I think Katja showed a couple of the examples that are all headquartered in the UK. But again, it is things that we are used to. Whose fault it is kind of like a chicken and egg question, I always feel, because on the one hand, we do have companies producing more and more. On the other hand, as consumers, and sometimes all of us might do this, we also feel, why is there nothing new in the shopping windows? Because we are so used that everything is turning around within a weekly basis. And this is also something that we are looking for. So fast fashion is definitely something that we are all kind of like part of. Whilst we are walking and talking, within the past 20 minutes, we probably all shed over 240,000 microfibers. As Kirsi highlighted, we don't actually see them. So they're just floating around, they're airborne. We might shed them more when we actually, for example, like wash them, if we don't wash them in ways that Kirsi outlined. And they're also, like, our garments shed normally more microfibers at the beginning, whilst over the lifetime, they're actually starting to slightly shed less. Now, one of the things that we've also observed is that a lot more people are actually environmentally conscious, especially since the elephant in the room, COVID. We have looked for different alternatives. Sometimes this might also mean that we are looking at garments that are made from more natural materials. But again, it doesn't mean just because it's natural materials that they don't shed any microfibers, they do. They're just not microplastics. But again, they also might have some issues. One of also like the biggest issues is the fact that we produce quite a lot of waste. I always find this graphic quite interesting because it sort of like visualizes what's actually happening. But to really reiterate this, we have over 350,000 tons of clothes. So it's 29,000 London double-decker buses that are actually going into landfill within the UK. So it's massive amounts. The majority of them are made from mixed fibers. So as Katja already highlighted, there's also an issue because we can't really recycle them. So even though we might have the best of intentions, it doesn't always really work, which again has implications for life cycle assessment, but also the impact that we can measure and that our garments have, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a social perspective. Katja already highlighted this, and Kirsi also alluded to this, is that we're actually consuming more and more. Everything has gone up. We are continuously consuming more. We have more and more garments. I know some people in the audience already have done research about it, how sufficient, like how many garments do you actually need to have? That's a good question as well. And what materials do they need to be out of? So Katja alluded to that sometimes when you're actually going into sports, or there might be certain professions where plastics are actually vital because they can protect you from, for example, like heat or anything else, or from just being injured. Whilst in other senses, we might not actually necessarily need to have garments made out of plastic, but just because it's convenient, that's something that we've been accustomed to. Now, if you look at where microplastics actually come from, so Fashion Revolution has done an amazing job in kind of like really visualizing this, which I thought was really brilliant. And one of the things that actually highlights is that 35% of microplastics do come from our garments. Even though we might think there's like other areas that must be a lot bigger, it actually isn't the case. The second largest producer are tires. So whenever we are driving or use public transport, there's also microplastics that are being released. Now, Kirsi already highlighted where things actually, like where do we find them? We find them in fish, in the most remote locations that we can actually see. So in the Arctic oceans, we might have found them in seals. We might have seen them in Australia in seafood. There's on the peaks that Kirsi already mentioned in Mount Everest. There's also a lot of crustaceans where we find them in. So one of the things that we are probably aware of now is that we might be eating microfibers. We don't know what the implications of this actually, like what the implications are, and whether or not this is particularly dangerous or not, we simply don't know, because fast fashion, even though people say slow fashion is a movement, I would argue the opposite, that it is actually fast fashion that is a movement, because it hasn't been around for that much amount of time. So all of the microfibers, all of the microplastics that are being released, we simply do not know what's going to happen in the future. So this is also why the circular economy is quite interesting, because we're trying to reuse, and the more we use our garments, the better it is, not only for CO2 emissions and from a life cycle perspective, but also in terms of releasing microfibers, because at a certain moment in time it sort of like stabilizes and there's not that many microfibers that are being released. Having said that, as Kirsi already outlined, there's also quite a lot of different things that we can do in order to reduce the impacts microfiber have. One of them is, for example, using filtration system, using different items in our laundering machine that actually capture those microfibers as well. But it's all about, and one thing that I'm very fascinated about is how we can actually make reuse out of it. I saw that somebody in the chat, I'm hoping I'm not mispronouncing the name, I'm really sorry if I do, but Irube already highlighted that she's doing accessories and also shopping bags made from plastics, and collecting loads of different things in an upcycling technique, which I think is super fascinating. and absolutely incredible, because again, it also shows there's a lot of things that we can actually do in order to reuse plastics that are already in our environment and what we can actually really make use of. So it's absolutely fascinating. Katja is the founder of the Sustainable Fashion Consumption Network as well. And she was also leading quite a lot of different projects. And one of them that I thought is really nice to actually highlight is this specific graphic where a lot of people from the network have worked together on, but really outlined that there's different options in terms of reuse, and also the little use phase where Kirsi's work falls into as well in terms of care, what we can actually do in order also to reduce microplastics. Again, one of the things that I also wanted to say, there is loads of examples of where plastics might actually be useful and or might also have interesting purposes. So for example, when we think about recycling, we might see cross-industry collaborations. So if you, for example, think about water bottles that are then transferred into t-shirts, whether or not this is always the best option is a different question. But again, we are reusing quite a lot of different things in different industries, and we're actually making use of things that are already out there. And it's the same thing. Freitag is one of the companies that also reuses plastics from the transportation industry and makes them into bags. Those bags are almost indestructible. Having had one since I was 16, I still have it. It still looks good. I still haven't managed to break it. So again, sometimes plastics can also be quite fantastic, because these ones are designed for example, like cyclists and as messenger bags. So when it's raining, obviously it protects it from whatever those messengers have to carry along. But at the same time, they're so robust that nothing really happens to them. And it's also sometimes thinking about longevity and how long can we actually use these products. So it might be quite useful as well. Within the fashion industry, we see increasingly more action being taken in terms of recycled and recyclable materials that are being used. We talk a lot about extending the life of garments and accessories. And we're also talking a lot about longevity, which again is quite important. And then it can also reduce plastics as well. So I hope I gave you a very brief whistle stop and tried to add in a little bit more from Kirsi and also from Katja in terms of why sometimes plastics might actually be important to use, but on the other hand, there's always challenges with the materials that we have as well. But thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, my voice isn't working so well. Our next speaker is Natalia. Oh, excuse me. And I'm hoping, oh, there you are, Natalia. Great. I think you can, do I need to share the screen with you? I think you can just share it. Oh, great.
Так, здравствуйте. Скажите, слышно меня, видно ли меня, все ли хорошо? Так.
Yes.
Хорошо. Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья. Меня зовут Наталья Ксенчак. Я фэшн-журналист, исследователь моды, и я являюсь автором книг, лекций, курсов для стилистов и дизайнеров одежды. Помимо этого, я интересуюсь различными проблемами в модной индустрии, о чем рассказываю на своем YouTube-канале, и сама стараюсь, например, носить винтажную одежду. У меня достаточно много одежды из секонд-хенда, то есть стараюсь по максимуму уменьшать количество мусора модной продукции, которая есть. И, конечно, тема пластика мне тоже очень интересна. И сейчас я немного вам расскажу о том, как пластик использовался дизайнерами от момента его создания и до осознания проблемы с загрязнением пластика, как дизайнеры его использовали в авангардных коллекциях и в коллекциях повседневной одежды. Но нужно понимать, что когда-то мир был мир когда-то не знал синтетику, и на протяжении большей части своей жизни люди носили одежду из натуральных волокон, что, конечно, доставляло массу неудобств в сравнении с нынешними временами. Например, эта одежда очень сложно создавалась. Хлопок, например, нужно было сначала вырастить, потом превратить его в ткань. Одежда была весьма сложна в глажении, хотя бы потому, что не существовало качественных и легких утюгов, как сейчас. Одежда была неэластичная, например, это доставляло неудобства при ношении чулок. Приходилось придумывать самые разные способы, как завязать их на ногах, подвязать. Или, например, в 18-19 веках кавалеристы носили, по крайней мере в России, носили очень прилегающие штаны, которые назывались лосины, из лосиной кожи. Так вот, их было очень сложно надевать. Также такая одежда давала, например, хлопковая или шерстяная давала большую усадку после стирки, но самое обидное, например, для историков моды, для археологов и для других исследователей, то, что эта одежда, она плохо сохраняется. Например, мне говорили знающие люди, что изделия из натуральных волокон хранятся не более 200 лет даже в музейных условиях, даже с учетом специальной обработки, и, к сожалению, большинство экземпляров моды былых веков сейчас утеряно. Идея создать синтетические волокна, по крайней мере, аналог шелковой нити, появилась в XVIII веке. Шелк до сих пор один из самых дорогих волокон, нить шелкопряда, но развиваться эти идеи стали только в XIX веке, как раз ученые получили первые синтетические вещества, и в принципе, можно с начала XIX века уже говорить о том, что синтетика, пластик стал использоваться в модной индустрии. И сейчас я бы вот хотела поговорить о том, как менялась дизайнерская мысль до того, как была осознана проблема загрязнения пластиком, и после. Начиная с XIX века, примерно в 1870-х годах, уже пластик использовался. Один из первых материалов был целлулоид. И нужно сказать, что на тот момент его можно было назвать вполне экологичным материалом, точнее не экологичным, а тот, который спасал буквально жизни животных. Потому что целлулоид заменял, например, кость слона или панцирь черепахи, из которого тогда изготавливали, например, украшения. И вот такие вот целлулоидные гребни, как вы можете видеть на фотографии, они, во-первых, и стоили дешевле, и ради них не нужно было убивать слона. Кроме того, целлулоид использовался для изготовления пуговиц, для изготовления колец, вот как вы можете видеть, каких-то украшений, и в частности делали пайетки, которыми расшивали платье. Единственная большая проблема тогдашнего пластика была в том, что он был очень пожароопасным, и если мы с вами почитаем книгу «Жертвы моды» Элисон Мэтьюс Дэвид, то узнаем о том, что огромное количество жертв было с летальным исходом, потому что у женщины, например, загоралась голова, загорался этот гребень, или загоралось платье вместе с этими пайетками. Но начиная с 1930-х годов пластик становится менее горюч, и, конечно, дизайнеры по-прежнему его используют, в первую очередь в аксессуарах. И вот появился тогда же в 1930-х примерно прозрачный пластик, который нам сейчас кажется вполне обычным, но тогда дизайнеры смотрели на него и видели замену стекла. Только это было такое легкое стекло, которое не билось, и, например, сюрреалистка от мира моды Эльза Скиапарелли его использовала, например, для создания вот такого замечательного колье с жуками в соавторстве с художниками-сюрреалистами. Не отставала от Эльзы Скиапарелли ее соперница Коко Шанель, и она одной из первых создала целый предмет, который можно было носить из синтетики, из поливинилхлорида. она сшила плащ для фильма «Набережная туманов», который вышел в 1938 году. Интересно, что для этого фильма Коко Шанель не стала создавать много нарядов, она сказала, что здесь можно обойтись только плащом и беретом. И для тех времен действительно очень новаторски выглядел этот плащ. Он эффектно блестел на черно-белом экране и тогда вызвал удивление модниц. И нужно сказать, что такой вариант на тот момент был очень удобен. Можно сказать, что синтетика встала на стражу практичности, ведь такой плащ можно было носить во время дождя и не намочить свой наряд. И вот я привела пример, до сих пор такие плащи популярны для осеннего сезона дождливого. И, то есть, до сих пор такие вещи носят. Как мы знаем, в 40-х годах это период Второй мировой войны, затем экономика восстанавливалась. Нельзя сказать, что как-то активно синтетика, например, в одежде использовалась, хотя в аксессуарах продолжал иметь место быть. Но настоящий бум синтетических вещей, синтетической одежды случился в 1960-х. Тогда как раз создавалось огромное количество синтетических волокон. Я слышу переводчика, и мне очень мешает. Ага. Появилось огромное количество видов пластика, в том числе металлизированные материалы, которые удачно вписались в эпоху человека в космосе. Произошла революция в космической промышленности, Юрий Гагарин полетел в космос, это вдохновляло дизайнеров на создание космических коллекций. Вот металлизированный пластик очень помогал. Очень интересная была коллекция 1966 года от Пако Раббана, который выпустил 12 неносибельных платьев. Это были наряды, которые можно было назвать легкими доспехами для сильных женщин. Это были платья, созданные из пластиковых дисков, которые достаточно легких, металлизированных, которые между собой скреплялись металлическими кольцами. Коллекция произвела фурор, и, конечно, эти платья очень произвели впечатление, например, на кинематографистов, их стали использовать в различных фильмах, но самое интересное, что модницы сами себе хотели создать такие платья, и Пако Раббан даже выпустил специальные наборы, где были вот эти металлические, извините, пластиковые диски, металлические кольца, инструменты и инструкции, как все это собрать. И если одни дизайнеры создавали авангардные коллекции с применением пластиков, то другие уже хотели внедрить его в повседневную моду. В 1960-х годах было такое явление, как бумажные платья или одноразовые платья из смеси целлюлозы и синтетики. Ну, примерно как это выглядело, вот если вы вспомните материал современных масок медицинских, вот что-то подобное было. Это были платья, которые пропагандировали легкость жизни, да, их можно было использовать и выбросить, их не нужно ни стирать, ни гладить. Повсеместно в универмагах тоже продавались наборы, на которых наборы, платья и, например, краски, и любая модница могла нарисовать любой принт на этом платье, но часто их использовали для рекламных целей. Например, известным стало платье Super Dress от Энди Уорхола, который создал вот такой наряд для компании Campbell's Soup. И в 1968 году президент американский Ричард Никсон выпустил, точнее не он выпустил, а использовал платье для своей агитационной кампании. Такие платья долго в моде не задержались, примерно где-то лет 5 они были популярны, но потом, конечно, их использование сошло на нет. Промышленность не стояла на месте, и если, например, до 1970-х годов синтетическую одежду не использовали рядом с кожей, да, то есть ее не носили сразу на тело, потому что она была очень колючая, она не пропускала воздух, не впитывала пот, и в целом была очень неприятной к телу, то вот начиная с 1970-х ученые уже начали создавать такие смесовые варианты. Конечно, уже тогда дизайнеры поняли, что полиэстер помогает минимизировать уход за одеждой, и, например, вот реклама 1970-х годов говорит о том, что дерзкий полиэстер не нуждается в глажке. Ну, и именно примерно с тех годов вещи с синтетическими волокнами стали активно заселяться в гардеробы. Ну и примерно где-то в нулевых годах стала потихонечку появляться тема того, что пластик вредоносен, и в мир моды эта идея проникла только к 2010 годам примерно. Дизайнеры стали осознавать проблему загрязнения пластиком и стараться как-то с ней справляться. Одни дизайнеры старались популяризировать тему гиперпотребления и излишнего использования пластика, в том числе при помощи авангардных таких кричащих коллекций. Вот, например, одна из них – это коллекция 2017 года от бренда Moschino. Как вы можете видеть, здесь как бы иронично показана тема мусорной свалки, мусорного бака. Модели выходили на подиум в платьях, которые сшиты из материала, похожего на мусорные пакеты. У одной из моделей даже шляпа в виде крышки от мусорного бака, ну а платье другое украшено мусором, даже и пластиковым, и упаковками. И если одни дизайнеры вдохновляются идеей мусора, то другие непосредственно шьют из него одежду. Так, например, делает российский бренд Plastic Doom. Галина Ларина, основательница бренда, шьет вот такие замечательные дождевики из использованных пакетов. Также, как мы знаем, большое такое направление – это одежда и обувь, аксессуары из переработанного пластика. Вот и пионером устойчивой моды и созданием как раз модных предметов из переработанного пластика является Стелла Маккартни. Она, например, не только пропагандирует гуманное отношение к животным, отказалась от натуральной кожи, даже когда она заказывает шерсть, овечью шерсть, она следит за тем, чтобы на этих вот фермах были камеры и отслеживает, насколько гуманно фермеры относятся к овцам во время стрижки. Ну и также, например, она создает обувь из переработанного пластика. Вот вы можете видеть пример, сделанный совместно с брендом Adidas. Ну а сама эта компания спортивной обуви и одежды тоже не остается в стороне. И вот, например, однажды создала коллекцию кроссовок из пластика, который был собран на пляжах. И говорится о том, что на одну пару кроссовок уходит около 11 пластиковых бутылок. Интересно, что одежда из переработанного пластика даже попадает на обложки мирового журнала Vogue. Вот, например, в Украине в 2020 году на обложку попала куртка бренда Enki Enki. Этот бренд, который создает куртки из океанического мусора, и даже наполнитель, например, гусиный пух, он заменяется также наполнителем из пляжного мусора и устричных раковин. Что же касается масс-маркета и такой моды для всех, то, пожалуй, лидером устойчивой моды является бренд H&M. Он не только располагает в своих магазинах пункты по сбору ненужной одежды, но также создает эксклюзивные коллекции вечерних платьев из переработанной одежды, пластика, пищевых отходов, и делает специально не какую-то повседневную простую одежду на вроде футболок, а специально делает очень эффектные наряды, которые демонстрируют мировые модели, например, Наталья Водянова, и таким образом привлекают широкого потребителя к проблеме загрязнения пластиком. Ну вот и как вывод из всего вышесказанного, можно сказать, что сейчас в модной индустрии идет параллельно два направления. С одной стороны, дизайнеры, конечно, используют пластик, синтетику для того, чтобы улучшать качество производимой одежды, даже заменять материалы животного происхождения. Вот как мы с вами узнали, так были спасены слоны, черепахи, или, например, не используется натуральная кожа, не используется, например, гусиный пух, но, с другой стороны, дизайнеры осознают проблему и стараются каким-либо образом с ней работать, либо просто пропагандировать, рассказывать людям при помощи креативных, авангардных коллекций, либо шить одежду непосредственно из использованных пакетов, например, из использованного мусора, создавать ткани экологически чистые или делать одежду, обувь из переработанного пластика. Вот, конечно, времени мало, информации очень много интересной, поэтому если вам интересно узнать больше о том, как дизайнеры работают с темой пластика, то подписывайтесь на мои соцсети, и всем большое спасибо за внимание.
Great, thank you so much. This is like almost overwhelming in terms of all this information. I think, wow, we're getting down there. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A. There's one question from Sayab Ahmed Iman, and maybe you could answer that. You could ask this question directly, Sayab. Not hearing from him. Is a long, he's basically asking about, I'll just read it, that actions needed at all levels to reduce the amount of plastic going into our clothing and to create a sustainable circular fashion system. My family has been doing business for the past 30 years in the apparel industry, but what I have seen buyers always trying to use cheap material and ask for competitive prices with the best quality. So it's quite hard to handle these hard deals when you are a manufacturer from Bangladesh. Unless you do, or they switch. Our government is not interested about pollution or any other lethal situation, which is going to cost more in the future, but I am practicing my role in promoting a sustainable and circular manner. So my question is, what should I do when I'm facing those terms as a manufacturer, also as a circular activist? So, anybody up for answering? Okay.
I think it's, sorry. I think it's probably a very tough question to answer, because it always, like, I mean, everybody is probably in a very similar boat. As long as there's no demand for change probably won't happen. On the other hand, we need somebody to actually make those changes and to make a start. So I think your question is very interesting, but it's a very hard one. But I also feel that within the fashion industry, we actually do see a lot more changes happening at the moment. So there's more and more policies coming. So hopefully in the future, it will be slightly brighter. I'm not sure, Katja, you probably can add something else.
Thanks. I do sympathize because I wear many hats, and researcher is my primary hat, but I have another small hat, being a small entrepreneur trying to have start a circular startup in Europe. And I would say that Europe, of all places, is one of the more advanced places to be when it comes to circularity and support for all sorts of, more innovative projects. And yet, even here, it's so difficult to apply, circular business models, some alternative thinking. and incorporate, your concerns about pollution, trying to improve the, to close the loop as a brand, as a producer. So I completely understand and hear you on this. My hope is for regulations that are coming. The EU textile strategy that Kirsi covered clearly sets a very ambitious, goal for improving and regulating fashion industry that's been running wild a little bit, like a spoiled child. My particular hope is for greenwashing claims to be regulated. This is something that I feel strongly about. I think this is going to help us setting up some sort of standards to measure sustainability, pollution, and other environmental dimensions of impacts of fashion. So regulations and policies are going to help us. That's my approach.
Right. Here's another question. What are the presenters wearing themselves today? Any volunteers?
Sure.
You go ahead, Katya.
Well, Beyond 30 Wears produced in Russia out of 100% wool Daisy knitwear. Beyond 30 Wears H&M shirt bought, I think, 12 years ago. Mud Jeans, a circular jeans and denim brand that is based, I think, in the Netherlands, I want to say. They recycle. They make you sign a pledge when you buy their pair of jeans saying, I promise I'm going to send it back to you. And socks of unknown origin.
Are there volunteers?
So I'm wearing no socks. I'm going to start the other way around. I wear jeans that I have had for the past, I think, 7 or 8 years. My shirt is also, I don't know which brand it is, but I had it since 2008, I'm pretty sure, because I saw an image of myself in it the other day. So yeah, but apart from this, one thing that I personally like doing is also supporting smaller brands, because I think they're absolutely incredible. So I found a really fantastic one that suits my body type, who are producing locally in the UK, and it's a super small company. And it's just nice to actually know that you can support individual people as well who are trying to make a change.
Yeah, and similar to the others, I also try to use the clothes as long as possible, but actually today I'm using one of the most new ones I have, since this is a special occasion where I wanted to have the one that didn't look too worn out. But basically supporting or using things longer, repairing them, buying secondhand if you need to buy something new. And I try to avoid synthetics on clothing that doesn't need to be synthetic. As Katja was saying, they do have some advantages somewhere.
Можно я тоже выскажусь? Я посмотрела, у меня тоже H&M и стопроцентный полиэстер, насколько я поняла, то есть эту вещь потом можно будет переработать, то есть мне нету там никакой другой